Welcome back to English Podcast, your favorite place to improve your English step by step, in a simple and fun way. I'm so glad you're here today. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself thinking, should I say can or could? What's the difference between would and should? Why do native speakers use all these little words that change the whole meaning of a sentence? Well, you're not alone. I promise you that. Even advanced learners get confused when it comes to modal verbs. They're small, but powerful. These verbs help us express things like ability, advice, permission, possibility, and even imaginary situations. So today, we're going to break everything down. We'll go over the most important modal verbs like can, could, would, should, must, and more, and I'll show you exactly when to use each one with clear examples that you can actually remember and use. This episode is perfect for beginner and intermediate learners, and even if you're more advanced, you'll still pick up a few tips and reminders to polish your grammar. So whether you're on your way to school, taking a walk, or just chilling at home, grab a notebook if you want, or just listen in, and let's master modal verbs together. Ready? Let's go! Let's begin with the modal verb, can. This is one of the most common and easiest to use. We use can to talk about ability, permission, and sometimes possibility. First, ability. When you say can, you're saying that someone is able to do something. For example, I can swim. That means I know how to swim. I have the ability. Another example is, she can speak 3 languages. She has the skill or ability to speak them. Now, the second use is permission. We use can to ask or give permission, especially in informal situations. For example, can I go to the bathroom? You're asking for permission to do something. And lastly, possibility, though this use is less common with can. For example, accidents can happen. This means it's possible, accidents may happen. So just to summarize, can is used to express ability, permission, and sometimes general possibility. Alright, let's move on to modal verb number 2. Could. Could is the past form of can, but it's not only used for the past. It actually has a few different uses: past ability, polite requests, and possibility. Let's go through each one step by step. First, we use could to talk about ability in the past. For example, when you say, I could swim when I was 5, it means that in the past, you had the ability to swim. But remember, we don't use could when we're talking about a specific moment in the past. For example, instead of saying, I could lift the box yesterday, we usually say, I was able to lift the box yesterday. So use could for general past ability, not one-time actions. Second, could is often used for polite requests or asking for something in a more gentle way. For example, instead of saying, can you help me? You might say, could you help me? It sounds softer and more polite. You can also say, could I borrow your pen? It's a respectful way to ask for something, and people often use it when they want to sound nice or professional. Third, we use could to talk about possibility, usually when we are not sure about something. For example, it could rain later. That means there is a chance it might rain, but we don't know for sure. Another example is, she could be at the library. Again, it's possible, but we're not certain. So in short, could is used for past ability, polite requests, and possibility. It's a flexible and useful modal verb that helps you sound more polite and express uncertainty in a soft way. Let's move on to modal verb number 3. May. May is a little more formal than can, and it's often used for permission or to talk about possibility. It's similar to can, but it carries a more polite or formal tone, especially when asking for permission. First, let's talk about permission. When you ask if you may do something, it's a more formal way of asking than using can. For example, you might say, may I leave early today? Or may I borrow your book? It's polite and respectful, especially in formal situations. However, in casual situations, can is more commonly used, so people often prefer saying, "Can I leave?" instead of "May I leave?" But when you really want to sound polite or formal, may is the way to go. Next, we use may to talk about possibility. When we're not sure about something and we think it might happen, we use may. For example, it may rain later today, or she may come to the party. Here, we're expressing a possibility, but we're not certain. It's like saying there's a chance something will happen, but we don't know for sure. So to sum it up, may is used for formal permission and to express possibility. It's a little more polite and formal than can, especially when asking for something, but it's still very useful in everyday speech. Now, let's talk about modal verb number 4, might. Might is very similar to may, but it's generally used to express possibility in a way that feels a little more uncertain. While may also expresses possibility, might is used when we want to suggest that something is less likely or we're even more unsure about it happening. First, let's talk about possibility. When you say something might happen, it means there's a chance, but it's less certain than if you say it may happen. For example, you might say, "It might rain tomorrow." This means there's a chance of rain, but you're not very sure. It's kind of like saying, "There's a possibility but we can't be certain." Second, we use might to talk about hypothetical situations. This is when we're imagining a situation that's not real. For example, "If I had more time, I might visit you." In this case, it's an imaginary situation because you don't have more time, but you're talking about what could happen if things were different. Might is also often used in polite suggestions or asking about something in a way that feels gentle. For example, you might want to bring a jacket, it's cold outside. This is a softer way of making a suggestion. So to summarize, might is used for possibility, especially when we're less sure, hypothetical situations, and sometimes polite suggestions. It helps us express uncertainty and is great when we want to sound gentle or less definite about something. Let's move on to modal verb number 5. Shall. Shall is a bit old-fashioned and formal, but it still appears in some types of English, particularly in British English. It's not as commonly used in everyday conversation as will or should, but it's still important to know because you'll encounter it in books, formal writing, and in certain situations. First, let's talk about suggestions. In modern English, we often use shall when making suggestions, especially when speaking formally or offering something. For example, "Shall we go to the park?" This is a polite way of suggesting an action. You're proposing an idea to someone, but you're also leaving room for them to agree or disagree. It's more formal than just saying, "Let's go to the park." Next, shall is also used for offers. This is particularly common in British English. For example, "Shall I help you with that?" This is an offer to help, and it sounds a bit more formal than just saying, "Can I help you?" In legal or formal contexts, we often see shall used to express a requirement or obligation. For example, the company shall provide health benefits to its employees. In this case, shall indicates that something is required or expected to happen, often in a rule or law. So to sum it up, shall is used for suggestions, offers, and to express formal obligations. It's a more polite and formal way of talking about the future, especially in British English. Now let's talk about modal verb number 6, should. Should is a very common modal verb used to give advice, express expectations, and suggest what is right or recommended. It's used to talk about what is likely or what is expected to happen, as well as to offer guidance on how someone should behave. First, let's talk about giving advice. One of the most common uses of should is when you're advising someone to do something. For example, "You should study for your exams." This means that studying for the exams is the right thing to do, or it's recommended for you to do it. Another example could be, you should eat more vegetables. You're giving a suggestion about what someone should do to live a healthier life. Second, we use should to talk about expectations. It's often used when we believe something is likely or what is expected to happen. For example, the train should arrive at 6 p.m. This means that, according to the schedule, the train is expected to arrive at that time, though it might not be certain. Should is also used to express obligation or what is morally right. For example, people should be kind to one another. It's something we feel is the right thing to do, or a moral expectation. It's not as strong as must, but it still expresses what we believe is the right behavior. So, in short, should is used for giving advice, talking about expectations, and expressing moral obligations. It's one of the most helpful modal verbs when giving suggestions or discussing what is likely or expected. Now let's move on to modal verb number 7, would. Would is another very versatile modal verb. It's used in a variety of situations, mainly to talk about hypothetical situations, polite requests, offers, and preferences. First, let's talk about hypothetical situations. We use would to talk about things that are imagined or unlikely to happen, often in conditional sentences. For example, if I were rich, I would travel the world. In this sentence, traveling the world is something the speaker would do if they were rich, but they're not, so it's a hypothetical situation. Another example could be, I would help you if I had more time. Again, it's imagining a situation that is not real at the moment. Next, would is used for polite requests. Just like could, would makes requests sound more formal or polite. For example, would you please pass the salt? Or would you like some tea? Both of these examples are more polite than simply saying, pass the salt, or do you want tea? Using would softens the request and makes it sound more respectful. Would is also used to talk about preferences. When you're talking about something you would prefer or like to do, you use would. For example, I would rather go to the beach than stay at home. It shows what you prefer in a given situation. Finally, would is used in offers. For example, I would be happy to help you with that. This is a polite way of offering assistance, suggesting that you're willing to do something. To sum up, would is used for hypothetical situations, polite requests, preferences, and offers. It's a great way to express things that are not real, show politeness, or talk about what you'd prefer in a situation. Now, let's talk about modal verb number 8, must. Must is used to express obligation, necessity, or strong recommendation. It's a very strong modal verb, often used when something is required or very important. First, let's talk about obligation. When you say must, it means something is required, and it's something you have to do. For example, you must wear a helmet when riding a bike. In this case, wearing a helmet is not optional. It's something that is required for safety. Must is also used to express necessity. This is similar to obligation, but it can also refer to something that is needed to happen. For example, I must finish this report by tomorrow. This means it's necessary for the report to be finished by the deadline. Another use of must is for strong recommendations. When you say someone must do something, it's not just a suggestion. It's something that's highly recommended. For example, you must try this restaurant. The food is amazing. Here, you're giving a strong recommendation because you think it's a great experience. Must can also be used to express certainty. For example, she must be at home by now, means you're quite sure that she's home. It's not a guess, but something you believe with a high level of certainty. To summarize, must is used for obligation, necessity, strong recommendations, and to express certainty. It's a very powerful modal verb, used to talk about things that are essential or strongly recommended. Now let's talk about modal verb number 9, ought to. Ought to is very similar to should and is used to express advice, obligation, or what is expected in a given situation. However, ought to can sound a bit more formal or old-fashioned than should, though they are often used interchangeably. First, let's talk about giving advice. Like should, we use ought to when giving advice or recommending something. For example, you ought to see a doctor if you're feeling sick. This means that seeing a doctor is the right thing to do, and it's being suggested for the person's health. Ought to is also used to talk about obligation. It's often used when we feel that something is the morally right thing to do, or when we think something should happen. For example, people ought to respect each other. This is expressing the idea that it is the right thing to do, similar to saying, people should respect each other. In some cases, ought to can express a sense of duty or responsibility. For example, you ought to help your friends when they need it. This suggests a moral obligation, indicating that it's expected of you to help others. Ought to is also used to talk about expectations. For example, he ought to have finished his homework by now. This suggests that, given the time, it's expected that he would have completed it already. To summarize, ought to is used for giving advice, expressing obligation, and talking about what is expected or the right thing to do. It's similar to should, but can sound a bit more formal. To wrap up, modal verbs are essential tools in English that help us express a range of meanings like ability, possibility, necessity, advice, and permission. We've gone over a variety of modal verbs, each with its unique use and function. To briefly review, we covered can for ability, permission, and possibility. Could for past ability, polite requests, and possibility. May for permission and possibility. Might for possibility, often expressing a smaller chance. Shall for future intentions or formal suggestions. Should for advice, expectations, and obligations. Would for hypothetical situations, polite requests, preferences, and offers. Must for strong obligation, necessity, and certainty. Ought to for advice, obligation, and expectations, often with a formal tone. Need to for necessity and obligation, usually in a less direct way than must. Dare to for expressing courage in doing something challenging. These modals allow us to express ourselves more clearly, add nuance to our statements, and communicate more effectively in different situations. They may seem a bit tricky at first, but with practice, you'll be able to use them confidently in both speaking and writing. I hope this podcast has helped you understand how modal verbs work and how you can use them in your daily conversations. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time with more tips on how to improve your English skills.